Dear learners, I am Christina Georgy, your academic counselor for the course code BEGC-133 titled British Literature. So we already had a course introduction to this particular course, that is BEGC-133 British Literature. So it's time for us to move on to the blogs. So first and foremost, let's deal with the easiest blog. I suppose most of you are interested in reading novels, right? Let's move on to blog 2 titled Thomas Hardy, Far from the Madding Crowd. So as I mentioned in the course introduction, in this particular blog, we'll meet this well-renowned writer Thomas Hardy. We'll study his life and works. We'll have an understanding about the age in which he wrote. And we'll specifically focus our attention towards this particular work, that is the novel titled Far from the Madding Crowd. So before that, it is important for us to have an understanding regarding what a novel means. What do you mean by a novel? So as I mentioned, novel can be considered as a literary genre. So we need to know the characteristics of the novel, which are the types of novel. All such things have to be discussed. Therefore, I invite your attention towards Unit 5 titled The Novel in Britain, an Introduction. As you can see, this particular unit serves as an introduction to the study of novel in the 18th century, 19th century, modern period, postmodern period, etc. It is from this background that we move on to Far from the Madding Crowd as it. So, in this particular unit, we'll study a brief history of the English novel from the 18th century to the present time. We'll also deal with the various causes for the rise of the novel in the 18th century. So, I've already uploaded a video on the rise of the novel in the 18th century. If interested, you can also refer to that. That is a PPT video. It will be very interesting for you. So, if you have your course book with you, by course book I am referring to the IGNO study material that they have sent you. So, if you have that, please turn on to page number 71. That is block 2, unit 5, page number 71. So, there, if you could move on to page number 72, you can see the first section, 5.2, what is a novel. So it is from here that I'll be letting you know the major points. So if you could refer to the textbook, it would be easy if you could mark the major points that I am mentioning. First and foremost, it is important to understand what is the exact meaning of a novel. So we can say that the novel is a genre of fiction writing. So what do you mean by fiction writing? We'll come to that. So the novel can be defined as a narrative in prose. What do you mean by prose? It is a piece of writing without any rhythm or meter. If this piece of writing has a rhythm or meter, it will become poetry. So we can say that the novel is an extended narrative in prose. Is it lengthier than a short story, or is it shorter than a short story? Which one is lengthy? Short story or a novel? That everybody knows. Thank you. So, short stories, as the very term suggests, will be shorter than a novel. Alright. So, always think that novel greater than short story. So, there comes something in between. Have you heard of novella? No? Novella, N-O-V-E-L-L-A. Novella is a short narrative tale. It is often popular story. It is a popular story and it very often has a moral. Alright, so a novella is considerably longer than a short story. Remember, a novella is longer than a short story. Now comes the question, which one is longer, novella or novel? Exactly. I suppose everybody understood. See, just remember it this way. This is how I used to study. Novel greater than, novella greater than short story. Short stories are the shortest and novels are the lengthiest. In between comes novella. Is that clear? Yes. So if you need some examples for novella, it includes Boccaccio's Decameron or Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. It's okay if you don't follow it now because it's written in your textbook. If you move on to page number 80, you can see a glossary there. So the very first mention in that glossary is novella. See? You also have the examples there. So if you are not aware of novella, it would be great if you could study this. Always refer to the glossary as well, especially with respect to this course code. They have elaborated on the concepts in the glossary. So yes, now we can define the novel as something written in prose, as a narrative in prose longer than a short story and longer than a novella. Remember, novels consist of a plot. At times there will be multiple plot. Alright. Characters are often caught in problematic situations and the development of the characters are shaped by life experiences. Very often we see that in these novels everything gets resolved by the end. In case of most novels, there will be troubles, there will be character development, there will be plots or multiple plots at times, but everything gets resolved mostly by the end of the novel. So is that clear? Yes, very good, thank you. So we can also say that this novel as a genre is a type of fiction writing. So let me explain this further. That is, novels are generally classified into two broad categories. That is, you have the literary novel and popular fiction. You need to understand that fiction has to be entertaining. That is, the very purpose of writing fiction is to hold the interest of the learner. Just remember that the literary novels are complex. How does that become complex? Both in characterization and content. So we can say that these literary novels are very often written by the novelists, the most celebrated novelists of all ages. Say Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, Thomas Hardy, even his work is that we are studying now, D.H. Lawrence, Leo Tolstoy, George Eliot. You must have heard at least a few of these names, right? So these people are considered as the classic writers in the history of English literature. So therefore all their works very often fall under the category of literary novel. Remember, the aim of a literary novel is the self-expression of the author, while the focus of popular fiction is the reader. That is why I am saying, for example, Pride and Prejudice and Harry Potter. Is Harry Potter considered a popular fiction? What is your opinion? Harry Potter is written by J.K. Rowling. Harry Potter has a series of novels to it. I suppose you know that. Yes, correct, Tina. Harry Potter would fall under popular fiction, whereas Jane Austen's novel would fall under the category of literary novel. I'm so glad that everybody answered. Most of you answered. Thank you. So just read this paragraph, which is on page number 72, the second paragraph. Fiction has to be first and foremost entertaining. That is, it has to hold the interest of the reader. So the fiction, the primary difference between the fiction or the literary novel and popular fiction is its range of appeal and the interest of the readers. So what is the primary reason that differentiates literary novel and popular fiction? It is simply the range of appeal and the interest of readers. Readers will be more interested in learning or reading popular fiction. That is what is mentioned here. There is some information regarding popular fiction given in your textbook. That is, popular fiction is very often referred to as airport novels. Do you know the reason? Because these are light novels that we can read for entertainment. Say, if we are traveling via flight, on your way to airport, or while we are waiting at a railway station, for that matter, these popular literature, popular fiction helps us to spend our time effectively. We can read while traveling or while waiting because these are light genres. Whereas literary fiction aims to hold up a mirror to the human condition, that is more like a serious and complex write-up. Is that clear? Do you understand the chief differences between popular fiction and literary fiction? This is kind of important. It would be great if you could mark this section. That is why I mentioned. You also need to understand the characteristics of the novel. So the traditional novels, in particular of the 18th and 19th centuries, offer a strong plot that pose a problem or a set of problems to the characters in the narrative. Some of these problems, as I mentioned, will be resolved as well. On the contrary, if we move on to the 20th century, what happens is that these writers took a break with the tradition. What kind of tradition? The tradition that the 18th and 19th century writers followed. Hence, in place of this conventional plot structure, they have multiple plots and multiple stories and have a greater focus on characters. And hence, there came a break from the traditional way of writing novels. Now, let's discuss some of the forms of novels. So, you must have heard about fantasy novel, epistolary novel, gothic novel, etc. Right? So, even in your textbook, these things are mentioned. I would like to explain these for you because most of you will not be aware of this, right? So, there are innumerable forms of novel. See, these forms are not limited to what we are discussing right now. There are many forms, some of which include adventure novel, picaresque novel, fantasy novel, epistolary novel, gothic novel, graphic novel, historical novel, dystopian novel, sentimental novel, science fiction novel, and utopian novel. So firstly, let's consider picaresque novel. So you can move on to page number 80 for that matter. It's all written there. So picaresque novels are those kinds of novels in which we see a hero who hails from a low class or a low social class. We see a hero who comes from a low social class, and this hero lives by his wits in a corrupt society. So if you remember our own David Copperfield, he can be considered as a quintessential example of a picaresque hero. Okay, similarly Huckleberry Finn also. These two heroes are part of picaresque novels. So we can say that picaresque novel is a genre of fiction that depicts the adventures of a roguish but appealing hero. These heroes, may that be Huckleberry Finn or David Copperfield for matter, they are roguish. They are roguish, but still we like them. We all like them even if they have certain demerits as a hero, right? So such heroes and their stories come under picaresque novel. So now comes yet another popular type of novel, especially during the early stages of novel writing, that is epistolary novel. So these are novels in which we find as a series of documents. The usual form in which these novels are written include letters. Very often there are novels in which there are lot of letters. For example, Dracula, it can be considered as an epistolary novel. Now we have Gothic novel. As the very title suggests, Gothic refers to something scary, right? So this is characterized by elements of fear, horror, death, etc. Very often we also see romantic elements in some Gothic novels. Yes. There are graphic novels, that is novels told in the form of comic strips at times. These are graphic novels. Historical novels everybody knows. Then adventure novels are there. If you have heard of Gulliver Travels, it is a work written by Swift, Jonathan Swift. Okay, that is an example of adventure novel. The adventure genre of fiction is fast-paced, and it usually centers on a protagonist in a dangerous or risky situation. Like the very term suggests, adventure. This particular novel will be very adventurous, and the center of adventure here will be the hero of the novel. Sentimental novel. Yes, feeling above reason is the characteristic of this particular type of novel. It would be great if you could remember some examples. For example, Lawrence Stone's A Sentimental Journey is an example. Science fiction novels. That is easy to remember, right? A genre of fiction in which stories often tell about science and technology of the future. Even many movies that we see these days are related to science fiction. Now comes utopian novels and dystopian novels. So utopian novels are works of fiction depicting ideal society. This very term utopia refers to an ideal society where the citizens are bearers of a perfect moral code. Alright. A utopian society is one where all social evils have been cured. So you can have examples such as William Morris and his work News from Nowhere. A Modern Utopia is a work by H.G. Wells. I hope you see all these in your textbook as well. Yes. Now comes dystopian novel. Dystopia is simply the opposite of utopia. Dystopia is simply the opposite of utopia. You just need to remember it that way. Dystopian novels describe an imaginary society that is dehumanizing and very unpleasant. The famous dystopian authors include Aldous Huxley, George Orwell. Ray Bradbury's Brave New World is an example. Okay, yes, just read about that. It would be great if you can understand. All right, so this is something important. Keep in mind this first section. So we can summarize what we already studied as follows. That is, the novel is a narrative, a prose narrative. It is longer than a novella and a short story. The word count ranges between 40,000 and 50,000. That is the word count of a novel. A novel deals with characters, realistic characters mostly. We can easily identify with these characters. A novel presents events involving the characters that again are realistic and easy for us to connect to. Nevertheless, all these characteristics of the novel depends on the type of novel in consideration. We already discussed the various forms of the novel, the various types of the novel. So I suppose I made it clear to you. Did you understand the session? So we'll deal with a brief history of the English novel in our upcoming session.